Hello and welcome. You're watching Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and thank you for joining us. Today is the International Memorial Day for victims of Japan's wartime sex slavery, also known as comfort women. And it's the first time that the day is being officially recognized in South Korea. For this occasion, we will later be speaking with a special guest, Professor Geunhye, who was a member of the task force that reviewed the controversial 2015 agreement between Seoul and Tokyo on the comfort women issue, to give us more insight on the current situation. That will be coming up later, but first we have the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. So we now know that the leaders of the two Koreas are going to meet for another summit, this time in Pyongyang, next month. We still don't know the exact date, but we do have some clues, as our Park Hee-jun reports.
At Monday's high-level-inter-Korean talks at the border, it was decided South Korean President MoonJae-in and North Korean leader KimJong-un will meet in Pyongyang sometime in September for their third summit.
We agreed the summit needs to take place as soon as possible. But considering North Korea's schedule, we've initially decided to hold it in September and set the date through discussions. Realistically, it can't happen in August.
The specific date, however, remains unclear. Seoul's presidential office told reporters after the talks that the Inter-Korean summit will most likely happen in mid or late September. Blue House spokesman Kim said it's difficult to hold a summit earlier due to North Korea's schedule, mainly the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the North Korean regime on September 9th. He added the specific summit date will have to be set through further working-level talks. But Moon Jae-in, special advisor to President Moon, thinks the date has already been set. He told South Korean cable channel JTBC that he expects the summit to happen between September 12th and 13th, which would be the first working day after North Korea's September 9th holiday. It's also widely believed by experts that the summit will happen before the UN General Assembly kicks off in New York City on September 18th. World leaders, including President Moon, are scheduled to give speeches there in the final week of the month. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
And with the next MoonKim summit in the works, the U.S. State Department says Washington and Seoul are in close contact about their shared posture regarding North Korea. A State Department spokesperson told Yonhap News Agency on Monday that the improvement of relations between North and South Korea cannot advance separately from resolving North Korea's nuclear program. Washington continues to press Pyongyang to demonstrate its commitment to denuclearization in ways such as declaring a full inventory of its nuclear arsenal. And U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has congratulated South Korea on its 73rd Liberation Day, a national holiday that'll be celebrated on Wednesday. Pompeo released a statement on Tuesday saying the U.S. recognizes South Korea's commitment to democracy, freedom, human rights, and that the rule of law underpins the country's success. He went on to say that those values, along with the airtight bond between the two allies, allows them to move forward to advance peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region. He said the U.S. remains committed to the alliance in coordinating the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. Today marks the 6th anniversary of the International Memorial Day for the Comfort Women, the term used to describe the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery. Most of them were from Asian countries and the majority were Korean. To remember those who suffered, South Korea is officially marking August 14th as an official Memorial Day starting from this year. Ahn Jung-geun tells us more.
On August 14, 1991, Kim Ok-sun, a Korean victim of the Japanese military's wartime sexual enslavement, testified about what happened to her, breaking a decades-long silence on the issue. But it was only late last year that the Korean government officially designated August 14 as a Memorial Day for the comfort women, so this is the first time for the country to be commemorating the national anniversary.
This is just a beginning to make this the most meaningful National Memorial Day. I believe in unceasing efforts to restore the human rights of the victims by revealing the truth. We also have to teach a true history to prevent the recurrence of such a tragedy.
South Korea's designation of a Memorial Day for the comfort woman is in lockstep with the current administration's stance on the 2015 agreement between Seoul and Tokyo, in which Japan gave about $9 million to fund the foundation for the victims and to resolve the issue of Japan's wartime sexual slavery. But Seoul decided not to use the money, and just last month, the cabinet approved a government budget to replace the Japanese fund. The decision is in line with the Moon administration's conclusion that the 2015 deal failed to reflect the opinions of the victims. Experts, however, say that renegotiating the agreement might be unrealistic, but the dispute between the individual victims and the Japanese government needs to be settled.
Even though the agreement between the two countries was made, the victims still have the right to hold Japan legally accountable. There has been a lot of effort made in South Korea, but every time the case reaches Japan's Supreme Court, it gets thrown out.
Of the 240 registered victims in South Korea, only 28 women are still alive. And as their average age is over 90 years old, time is running out for them to receive what they call a heartfelt apology from Tokyo. Geunhye, Arirang News.
This year marks 108 years since Korean independence activist Ahn Jung-geun was put to death, but his remains are still missing. Next year, being the 100th anniversary of the March 1st independence movement, the South Korean president has announced today that the two Koreas are planning to jointly carry out an excavation project to find Ahn's remains. And with the 73rd National Liberation Day coming up, people are hoping that progress can be made toward finding the hero and bringing him back home. Hong Yu reports.
Ahn Jung-geun, who fought for Korea's independence and killed Ito Hirobumi, one of the main people behind Japan's annexation of Korea, is yet to be brought home. Ahn's remains are known to be buried somewhere near the Lee-sun prison, but have yet to be found, and his tomb waiting for him in Seoul remains empty. Little progress has been made towards finding the remains of patriot Ahn Jung-geun since the last time South Korea tried to look for the corpse with the help of China in 2008. But there are renewed hopes of finding Ahn's remains thanks to the Panmunjeom Declaration, in which the South Korean President MoonJae-in and the North Korean leader KimJong-un agreed in April to make joint efforts to find Ahn's body. Past searches were not successful as China, which has access to important information for the excavation, was not so cooperative.
The Chinese government stated that the request for the excavation of Ahn Jung-geun's remains must come from both South and North Korea, since Ahn's homeland is officially Hwanghae-do province located in North Korea. With China having clearly stated its stance, the only way to start another excavation is through cooperation between the two Koreas.
When South Korea requested for topographic maps of the prison, China rejected the request, saying that the region was a military base in the past, so the Chinese military won't allow such information to be shared. So South Korea's request for protection of the land where it is most likely that Ahn's body might be was also ignored, and the area went through a lot of changes.
우리 생각에는 이제 여기서 이렇게 나와서 이렇게 해서 요 길로 갔을 거다.
Cooperation from Japan is also important. Perhaps the most crucial clue to find the body is in Japanese hands.
The document that specifically states that Ahn was buried in one of the public cemeteries of the prison is kept by Japan. The Japanese government is really meticulous at keeping records of everything. As such, there must be a document with the exact location of Ahn's remains. We keep asking Japan for it, but Tokyo has been uncooperative regarding our request.
And to find such a document, research from both the government and private sector is needed, and the two must work together for the project to be a success. Ahn Jung-geun's last words were, "Bury my body again in my homeland when our nation's sovereignty is restored." Hopefully, if the momentum for peace between the two Koreas continues, Ahn's wish could be at last fulfilled. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Today is August 14th, and this year is the first time that South Korea recognizes the day as the official memorial day for victims of Japan's wartime sex slavery. It's another important but perhaps small and belated step to try and raise awareness and bring justice for the victims, euphemistically known as comfort women. It's also been some 8 months since a South Korean government task force review announced that the 2015 deal between Seoul and Tokyo, which was meant to settle the comfort women issue between the two nations, was fundamentally flawed. This was meant to turn back the clock on a controversial deal that was widely criticized by the victims and wider public in general. But despite President Moon calling on Japan to sincerely apologize and take responsibility for its war crimes, Tokyo has so far refused, saying the 2015 agreement had concluded the matter. So despite positive steps, the issue remains unresolved. On this Memorial Day, to talk more on this, we have a special guest with us, Professor Kim Eun-mi, the Dean of Ewha University Graduate School. Professor Kim, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, not only are you the Dean of Ewha Women's University Graduate School, but you were also a key member of the government task force that reviewed the 2015 agreement between Seoul and Tokyo, and that tried to controversially settle the two governments' issues over the issue over the comfort women issue. Can you briefly explain to our viewers what that agreement was and what the review concluded last year?
On December 28, 2015, the foreign ministers of the Republic of Korea and Japan agreed that the comfort women issue is now being resolved, and they came to an agreement, and that was announced to the public of both countries. However, the public criticism in South Korea was very huge, and in particular the victims themselves and the victims groups were adamantly opposed to the fact that the agreement took place without their knowledge, without their consultation, and that there seemed to be some kind of backroom deal that happened without anybody's knowledge. So the three questions that the task force began was, first, was the negotiation and consultation a victim-centered approach? Was that honored? The second question that we had is, was there a behind-the-room negotiation and promises that were made behind closed doors? The third question was, how and why was the very controversial phrase final and irreversible resolution included in the final agreement? So these are the three questions that we began with, and it took us a good 5 months. 9 independent committee members worked very hard for 5 months to look at the process, to look at the actual content of the agreement. We poured through a huge amount of background material, as well as met with the victims and the victims groups to come to some conclusions.
And what were those conclusions that you came to?
There were 4 and perhaps 5 major conclusions. The first one was that the victim-centered approach really was not honored throughout the process. The victims were not really interviewed or really consulted, especially on the amount of reparations that were being made to the victims in Korea. Second, former President Park Geun-hye sought to resolve the comfort women issue by tying it to other diplomatic issues at the time. So without the comfort women discussion or resolution, it seemed like none of the diplomatic affairs between Korea and Japan could move forward. And as it was coming near to the end of 2015, I think President Park and her close confidants felt that in recognition of the 60th anniversary of the 1965 agreement, let me read the official title, Agreement between the Republic of Korea and Japan concerning the settlement of problems in regard to the property and claims and economic cooperation. This is known as the Claim Settlement Agreement for the Japanese colonial period. And since the 60th anniversary was coming up very quickly, they thought it was critical to resolve it ASAP before the end of the year. So there was these other diplomatic concerns that sort of colored the pace and the content of the agreement. Third, we felt very strongly that important matters such as the comfort women issue need to be dealt with in a much more democratic, participatory way in this day and age, to just let the government do the first track and not involve the people, especially the victims. We saw it as a very problematic process. Fourth, we also found that there was lack of communication, or very little communication between the president, the actual persons who conducted the negotiations, and the victims. So there was a lot of secret dealings, and we found through the process there was actually a high-level negotiations that was completely hidden from the public. And at times it seems like the Director General level negotiation, which was seen as the official chain of communications and negotiations, they were also not having direct communication with the high-level talks. So there was a lot of miscommunication, lack of communication in the process. Finally, the final and irreversible resolution, that phrase was included, we found at first by the insistence of the South Korean government, not the Japanese. I will talk about this later because this is of, I think, a very critical issue that we uncovered during the committee work.
Well, that committee work was very important and groundbreaking almost in dealing with this kind of showing some of the faults that the process had before. It's been 8 months since then now. Looking back now, what's happened since then, and what do you make of that?
Since then, I think I was pleasantly surprised by the Japanese reaction. At first, we were concerned that the Japanese reaction would be very strong and harsh and would start sort of a diplomatic warfare between the two countries. But I think the two countries have recognized that the bilateral relations go far beyond the comfort of women issue, and the two countries together and with the world face other very critical issues of today and tomorrow. So I think they have unspokenly but agreed on a two-track process and left the comfort of women issue from the top of their agenda, which I think is healthier for the time being.
Healthier for the time being, but for the victims and the people who are involved in this issue, having that issue unresolved is problematic, wouldn't you say?
It is problematic, and the South Korean government, I think, has made a promise to keep the fire burning, maybe not at the front burner at this time, but at the back burner, but will keep it burning until the issue is firmly resolved. The victim-centered approach has several important sort of principles or components. The first one is the recognition that the perpetrator recognizes that this is a crime and sincerely apologizes for the crime. The second issue is that the victims recognize and agree that the apology is acceptable. And the third one is there has to be a continued effort to prevent this type of crime from happening again. So if the Japanese government is not ready to say this is our crime and this we have done this wrong and we would like to repair the relations. If the Japanese government is not ready to do that, we're ready to do number 3 at least. So there's some movements, I think, moving forward.
There will be some people, obviously, the task force review itself was a very important and enlightening review of the process. But at the same time, as we talk about this, there's some critics would say that the MoonJae-in government hasn't done much since then. Would you agree with that assessment? Or what?
Since I've been working closely and following this issue more carefully, I think I'm privy to information that is perhaps not of the public's consumption. There have been 2 very important decisions made by the Moon government, and they've moved forward. The first one is they're making sincere efforts to work with the victims and the victims groups to help them with whatever their concerns and needs are. That includes having a memorial like the one that we're remembering today, and having some forums or dedications for the memory of these victims. And secondly, to make sure that we raise awareness so that this doesn't get repeated again. At the global level, the South Korean government has recently announced that it will work on the global issue of wartime sex crimes. This is still a problem that is ongoing today and perhaps will continue to tomorrow and the near future. So the South Korean has pledged in the global stage that it will work on this sexual crime issue, whether it's happening in some place elsewhere. Right now, the South Korean government will be championing that cause with conferences and with development cooperation if it is a developing country that where the crime is occurring.
Of course, last year the government did pass the bill that said that from now on, August 14th will be commemorated as Comfort Memorial Day.
Right.
How important is this kind of thing for the victims and for the cause?
I think this is in recognition of August 14th, 1991, when the late Kim Il-sung, who became the first woman to ever claim that there was this kind of sexual war crime during the Japanese colonial period during the Second World War. So in commemoration, in recognition of her tremendous courage, I think this is very important, because with her coming out with the accusation of the Japanese government, many other victims, not only in Korea, but throughout the world, were able to come out with her to say there was indeed wartime sex crimes during the Second World War. So it's a very important day, not just for Korea, but for the world. Second, I think we're doing this not just recognizing the courage and remembering the atrocities that were perpetrated during the Second World War, but more importantly, this is remembering so that we don't repeat this history ever again. So I think for those important reasons, this is a very critical, and I think late, but sooner the better. So I think this is very important.
President Moon has said Tokyo needs to admit its wrongdoings and apologize sincerely for its actions. But so far, Prime Minister Abe and Tokyo have refused to do so and said that the 2015 deal has concluded, settled the matter already. Mm-hmm. Why does the Japanese government continue to refuse to take these kind of steps that the victims would like to see, would hope to see? Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, what can the South Korean government do to try and help them admit to their crimes as well?
I think for the perpetrators, why they're continuing to deny, it's hard to go into their minds to see why they're saying these things. But Japan has been consistent in its in not recognizing, admitting its wrongdoings during the colonial period, during the Second World War. So this is in line with all of the other things that the Japanese government has not admitted. So I would imagine admitting to this crime would lead to other sort of crimes against humanity they have committed. So I think this is going to be opening a floodgate of the past wrongdoings that they must admit. And I think because of the history textbooks, because of their constitution, because of their social milieu and so on, this is really opening a major Pandora's box for Japan, I would imagine.
So for right now, it's very difficult for South Korea to try and make them or encourage them to take these appropriate steps then?
What I think the South Korean government has been doing and is doing well is bring the level of discussion on this issue, not just as a bilateral issue between South Korea and Japan, but raise it as a global concern that wartime sex crimes should not happen anywhere, any place. So raising the profile of the significance of this issue, bringing global attention, bringing global camaraderie to this issue, I think is the right step. Actually, the Japanese government under Abe, Prime Minister Abe has been supportive of these causes. So it would, I think, really be noble of the two countries to come together jointly on this issue.
Talking on that, part of the 2015 deal was for a fund to be set up so that Tokyo could pay $1 billion yen, that's about $8.3 million at the time, into it and help support the victims. What's been announced recently is that the Moon administration has done is freeze that money, essentially, right, and at the same time come up with its own money to replace it and help the victims. When you came on our program in January, you said you viewed this action as a clever way to balance the need to honor the victims, but at the same time, keep hold of that money from Tokyo for possible future plans.
Right.
Would you still agree with that? And what can we done with that money that's frozen from Tokyo?
I think if we were trying to send it back to Tokyo, that is really renegotiating, which will be reneging on the formal agreement that was made between the two governments. Even if the current administration, most of the people, the Korean people, do not recognize or do not appreciate what was in the agreement, it is still a formal agreement. It is a diplomatic agreement that was reached by the two countries. So in honoring that formality of the agreement, I think it is good, it is appropriate to leave the funds alone as is. But the thing that the Moon government did was there was some money that had been paid to some of the victims. The government decided that to replenish the funds, so we will keep the 1 billion yen, so that on the surface, the Japanese money that was given to the Korean government to support the victims will stay as the Japanese fund, but it will be in a trust fund. The victims will be supported by the South Korean government, not because of the reparation from this fund. So they froze it that way. In the future, the South Korean government can renege with the Japanese government for the 1 billion that is on hold, but that is up for future negotiations. I don't think they will embark on that route as of yet.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, Professor Kim, but thank you for coming in today, and thank you for all your important and hard work and efforts in bringing light to this kind of issue and helping them deal with the victims, helping the victims deal with this as well.
Yes, I think we recognize that this is a crime against humanity, even if we hope there will be an appropriate reparation to these victims before many of them have already passed away, before all of them are no longer here with us. So the timing is very critical. But on the event, even when they're all gone, it's going to be very important for us as humanity to remember and to not repeat this type of history.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
That's all from me. Wednesday is Kwangbokjeol, South Korea's National Liberation Day, so do tune in to our special newscasts from 12 p.m. I'll be back Thursday with more insights and analysis into the day's top stories. Thank you for watching, and see you again next time. Goodbye.